So it is Jackie, Gabe, and I for our second conversation today. And there were two threads left from the last conversation that I just had, but now I am missing. So we'll get back to that. I'll pull that up. And in the meantime, here they are. So the two threads from our last conversation was Jackie asking how to take actions toward practicing peace on earth to be the change I want to see. And Gabe was talking about the thread of choice and decision-making based on thought and the embarrassment for what we've become. And I think the question was, how do we get there? What is it that we're doing in this almost blind way that has us so doubtful about what we've become rather than what we are? And then who we think we are is what we think, not truth or reality. How can a brain get around thinking is not all there is? What's the motivation to lie? So I think those are separate questions, but they're all.
Morning, Jack. Thanks again. Morning, Jackie.
Good morning, Gabe. Good morning, Jack.
So I think those two, Jackie's thoughts and my thoughts are well interconnected. She's talking about taking the action, and I'm sort of dwelling in the action of the past obsession. Specifically, the pathways. Had an incident yesterday at work, small, but seemingly taking me back to the days of panic and fear for a very few seconds. But I was sort of shocked even after all our discussions and thoughts and what I thought was my daily practice of being centered, got me off center very quickly. So that was sort of unusual and strange feeling to have, that I was somewhat out of control of it. And maybe that's part of it, is control.
You mean the distinction was it was happening to you?
Yeah.
Okay. Because that tends to be the thinking we have about the things we think we're not thinking, or the things we think are happening to us rather than being caused by us. So
yeah, that's very good, actually. It's very insightful because it was happening to me.
Well, and that's the source of blame and shame and guilt and contempt and all the things we hold against other people. Those are typically the things that we will turn into what we see about in others while we're denying them in ourselves. So it's sort of the balancing act of realizing that the absolute is always being realized. We're just not always paying attention to it.
Why are we not always paying attention to it?
Right, that's a great question. Why can't we? That's the goal, to be in the moment as often as we can and to be the change that we want to see. But I think it's human that sometimes, I think we wouldn't be, if we could just stay on it constantly, we wouldn't really be human or in life. Like, I like to think of a monk having to wait tables in Beverly Hills. And I like to see if they'd be able to stay in peace the whole time.
But a present knowing awareness that's absolute doesn't pay attention because there's no cost to that awareness. It's just a state of being. Very different concept than what thinking thinks about when it thinks about paying attention. So the question in both of your cases is, why aren't we paying attention? And I would suggest it's because we're so addicted to ideas that aren't true, and the compelling nature of those ideas has caused so much havoc for so long that we think we can't let go of the attention we're paying, or everything's going to go to hell and we're going to die. And that cycle of thinking that we're trying to maintain a life that doesn't even live is insane. It just makes no sense. So getting to you, Jackie, and your point is, we're always in the present. That knowing awareness, we don't have to think we're in the present to be in the present. So when we think we're not in the present, we think thinking is the dominant source of reality, and all of a sudden wonder why we feel disconnected and not present.
Right. Well, we
And
can, in our minds, we can live not in the present, or
no, impossible. We're always there.
right.
We're always there. This is the root of beginning to see that the past and future are only what we think of it in the present, ever. A lie is only what we make of it in the present, ever. Delusion is only an illusion we're making believe is real in the present now. It's the only time anything ever happens. And it really, my sense is it's not even a time, because if the present is always new, which is why we're constantly moving into this thing we call the future. But when we get to the future, we're always present when we're there, just as we were present in the past that we think of. It was always the present. All we're really witnessing is things changing. And that is a function of time. Time and space are combined because time equals distance. Distance is how things move, how they change, if I move anything in relation to everything, everything is changed in relation to that thing. So change is this constant thing in our universe that's going on, but it's a reflection of time. It's a reflection, change is a reflection of time, and time is a reflection of change, just like distance is a reflection of time. Distance takes time, time takes distance. So they're all functioning on that basis.
Isn't it true that that time is an illusion?
Yes, exactly. So that's the point of realizing that all we're doing is making something to justify thinking about the past that's actually only our story about it in the present, and worrying about a future that isn't even here. And why, if we're absolute knowing beings, wouldn't it worry us to be spending our time, paying our attention in thought to things not happening? Wouldn't that cause anxiety for a knowing being to say, you know what, something's wrong here? Something's going on that threatens the existence of this body that I've been given responsibility for. And I want to make a note in the body that this is happening. And what do I feel? Anxious immediately, disturbed immediately. Those aren't coincidences, they're consequences of my thinking. Now, to the point you're making, Jackie, consider that mind, to thinking, mind is the brain. Right? Thinking is designed to run the body. It's not designed to run the universe. The universe is its designer, effectively, in general terms. I don't want to describe it as a definitive description, because however it happened, but it certainly didn't start happening with my thinking or your thinking. Right? That was something that happened subsequent to whatever was happening that allowed us to even have the molecules come together to perform the function they do to create the body and that whole thing. So if you just think of, to the brain thinks, and it thinks for the body. And the thinking it does causes feelings immediately, because the feelings are actually reflections of our senses. What are we feeling about the environment? What's going on? And when most of our senses are feeling the environment around us, though we can feel ourselves, though interestingly, it feels much better when somebody else tends to touch us than when we do. Because our touch and the feeling it's touching is a little redundant compared to somebody else who's just touching us. We're not feeling them, we're feeling their hand. And when we're feeling our hand, our touch is feeling the feeling that it's creating. It's kind of redundant, so it's not as exciting. It's not as stimulative, right? So there's a desensitization within our own experience, in our body's language, to what we're thinking, because it's so immediate to what our experience is.
That's what hit me yesterday, Jack, is the immediacy of it was, read an email and then boom, like didn't even finish the sentence about something, and the mind is off and running. The thinking, the obsessive thinking is off and running towards the lie.
Well, the obsessive thinking is a lie.
Yeah.
It's what you're witnessing, Gabe, and what I suspect happens is I become aware. I don't become oblivious to what's happening. everything that's been happening that I've been oblivious to becomes obvious.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Yeah, I was.
Part of that is actually an indication of growth. So it's seeing that the flip side of what would normally be considered the worst thing that can happen has an incredible lesson in it, saying, if you're seeing what's happening here, this is a guidance system to what you're doing that you don't even think you're doing. So now, knowing that, thinking that, now you know what you're doing that you don't think you're doing. That's a huge bridge to gap when we think the subconscious is something we can't get to. And those hardwired brain things are hardwired, and we can never. We've created all sorts of stories around how the body works simply to justify that we can't do anything about what we're doing. Now, if we spend most of our time living in a past and future that doesn't exist, that would make sense to create a story about the brain and body not being able to function, because what we're asking it to do is completely dysfunctional. Completely.
I was just sort of amazed at this, like you said, the instantaneous speed of it, speed of light, man.
It's even quicker than the speed of light because there's no time in between it.
Yeah, it's just.
That's what I was starting to say about the present moment. If it's always beginning new, it has no past. It has no continuum. It's not in time or space. So presence, which we're always in, Jackie, always in, we're always present, doesn't mean our thinking is thinking about what's happening, because we're free to think about whatever we want. But that shows that thinking is operating often under its own dictates. It's not looking at reality. It's looking at what it's creating and thinking about reality, which is not reality.
So whatever we're paying attention to, we're paying.
There's a cost.
There's a cost for it.
Yes.
So if I'm paying attention to something I want more of, I'm going to get more of something that I.
It's just going to cost more.
But doesn't it cost more if I? Oh. But I mean, like something I want more of, not like materialist, like think something I want more of, like more joy.
Well, you can't have any more than you have right now.
Oh.
And you can think you don't have more, and as a result of thinking you don't have more, you will experience less joy. That's it.
Oh.
It's so immediate, it's so quick, that it's so obvious that the only way to justify it is to lie about what's happening, because otherwise it would require us admitting everything's already been done for us, and thinking is irrelevant to all that's been done. It's irrelevant, and yet when you see that, it frees thinking to all of a sudden start functioning and saying, oh, I am designed as a body and a thinking being to express the fullness of my knowledge in thoughtful ways. I'm not designed to run around thoughtlessly trying to make up and compensate and rationalize and justify why I shouldn't be where I am when I'm there, why I shouldn't have what I have when it's what I have, right? That's not my design. That would be a design that would begin to consider that the past and future are all that there is, and the present has no place at all, which is why we often talk about really needing to work to be in the present. If we need to work to be in the present's all that there is, then it would be our work that makes the present present, and that idea that the past and future and lies can be made true would in fact be able to happen, because we would actually be voiding the potential for our potential to leave this present state. It's impossible. It's you can't negotiate your way out of an absolute state of being.
So in that way, as what I was saying, be the change. So if I want more joy, there's no such thing, because I already have all the joy that I can have. So I just be joy.
Well, you begin to express it, and as you begin to claim you have it, and joy is probably nothing compared to the bliss that's actually our natural experience, which would almost be orgasmic in terms of experience, and probably what sex gives us this sense of connection, because it tends to be based in love, and it tends to be a high point achieved between people. All these sort of metaphoric opportunities to look at the body's functional capacity would be a blissful state that might be beyond everything we've ever imagined in terms of actually feeling good or feeling happy, or any of the things that we sort of have marginalized in our in our thoughtlessness, in making believe that that's all I want to do is be happy all the time. Why? You never hear people struggling with too much happiness. There's a clear indication that the root of what we're doing is wrong enough to constantly have us want to feel better. So if our thinking thinks we're not where we are, and what we have being that everything right now between us, everyone, everywhere, no matter whether they're listening, they're not listening, we think they're out there, we don't think they're out there, they're on this planet living somewhere else, who knows? Whatever it is, they are right now intimately connected to us. Now, everything that's happening. Now, if you can have more than that, I don't know how that would be possible. So if the start point is, I want to get something and I want to see the peace in the world and I want to be the peace in the world, it's a claim that it isn't in the world and it's going to be up to you. That's a big job for one human to do. I am
peace?
Yes. Thank you. Yes. And then more than that, the I disappears because the I and me, if you turn me upside down, it's we.
Oh, my word.
And addiction is a twisted form of thought because that's what a lie is. A lie only exists on the basis of it claiming to be exactly the opposite of what it is, which is true. So anything that exists only on the basis of not being what it is and only being what it isn't has no basis other than in thought. And when we maintain thoughts, and I would say the primary issue that you're pointing to right now, both of you, is exactly where this root begins, where we've developed all these cultural mores and creeds and rules and regulations about how to behave to confirm that how we have been behaving, and think of the word behaving, being and having, how beings have had what they have, now have to be modified and regulated and disciplined and organized to function on a certain way to look like we're doing, because we're worried about appearance, not substance. We want to look as society like we're really effective and we're nice and we're kind and we're generous and all that, while in fact we're covering the contempt and the spite and the jealousy and the backbiting and pettiness that we have in our thinking. And one of the things, I was talking to Philip yesterday, or no, it was somebody else. They'd gone for a drive. It was Anthony. I was talking to Anthony yesterday, and he said he'd taken a drive for 3 hours, and all he had in his mind was, I don't want to get into an accident. So he's preoccupied with
I get where that was going.
And he said at some point within 30 miles of his house, some woman, and I guess he was driving a fancy car or something, but some woman started to squeeze into his lane. And he couldn't believe that she was trying to get in because there was no room. So what did he do? Sped up. He didn't back off. He didn't give her way. He sped up.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, isn't it interesting when the predisposed ideas we have about not wanting something end up realizing exactly what we claim not to want? We must want it to prove the thinking we were doing about the fear we had is in fact true and real. And that's a pretty sick thing, to create consequences that we claim not to want, simply to confirm the sick thinking was in fact right. And that's largely, my estimation, what culture's been built on in many ways.
I think of that when I don't want to see a ghost. I'm like, oh God, stop thinking that you don't want to see it, because then you'll see it. Not that I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but just like I was in a scary house one time, staying by myself. On the road, and I was like, oh God, I don't want to see a ghost. And then I was like, oh God, it's gonna make me see a ghost. So I just knocked myself out with a frying pan. I'm kidding. But
even thinking you're not going to see it is giving credibility to them being there, so they're already there in the thought. The ghost is the haunting image you're creating by not wanting to even see it. And that fear that was Anthony's thought, I would suggest. I don't want to get into an accident. Why is the first thought about driving, I don't want to, I said to him, who goes into their car and says, I'm going to rush to the store to get into an accident? Nobody tends to do that. That's generally predisposed. So thinking about it chronically, you end up in a loop of worry over something that isn't even happening. And my experience is that worry is a prayer for what we don't want, and we always get it. We're bound to realize it if we continue to pray for it and not worry, because we're so preoccupied in our thinking, paying so much human attention, this thinking attention to what isn't happening, that what is happening, all of a sudden we become oblivious to. And if we can...
worrying is meditating on bullshit.
Yeah. Well, and we even use bulls to excuse our shit.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I realized the word hogwash the other day it's as though it's the pigs that do it, not us. It's hogwash is bullshit. It's another excuse we use not to say, wait a minute, I'm at the center of the thinking doing that, and how the lens of my seeing is based on what I'm thinking. And when I'm thinking obsessively, I'm absolutely positive what I'm thinking is true. And that's pretty sick, because at the same time I'm positive and fighting for that claim, I feel great self-doubt simultaneously. And the two cannot function in the same way. But again, it shows the twisted backward nature of this thinking.
Then we are sick.
Yes.
I am very sick then.
Well, we aren't sick, but our thoughts are sick.
Our thoughts are sick.
So we can be responsible in an absolute sense, and I would suggest we are, and act irresponsibly, and then still not be irresponsible as beings, but be responsible for the irresponsible actions we're taking. And something I learned in Cher, who deals with a lot of recovery and homeless issues, they have a course in peer counseling and how to approach people who are resistant to help, many of which are on the streets. And the guy said, you can love somebody and not like their behavior. And I thought, wow, that's a new way of seeing everybody. Not just people on the street who are resistant, but when you begin to see that love, this is his explanation years back, was describing the fact that this love is an indivisible source. You can still love somebody and not like what they're doing. And when I approach them on that basis, all we're then talking about is behavior and something they're doing, rather than attacking who I think they are. And the difference is dramatic, because I would suggest it's more accurate. If a loving source is what we share, we already have that for each other. What we struggle with in humanity is not love, but like.
Yeah.
I love all my ex-wives. Both. So it's that like issue that's really interesting, that we could grow up and make believe that what we liked was so critical to our survival that not getting it, we'd have to stamp our feet and become petty and self-pitiful and all that kind of stuff that we end up suffering, largely out of just simply not getting what we think we want. And what we think we want is what we think serves the image and appearance of who we think we are, which is all ego. It's all just superficial. It's not substantive.
Yeah, I heard that we can have peace by not needing to be needed.
Well, let's just say we have peace by never doing anything at all.
Well, you can't do that.
Sure we can. You did it before you were born. You'll do it after you die.
Right.
After your experience dies, this human experience. That nature won't go anywhere. It'll still be your nature. In that Netflix thing about, what was it called? Life After Death, where those people actually experienced, one woman was drowned for 30 minutes and had a complete experience of knowing and awareness. She wasn't breathing. She wasn't doing the things that we'd call life, but had a very clear knowing experience of what was happening around her. Another woman had her heart taken out of her body, was dead for 30 minutes on the operating table, and talked to the doctor later about the operation. And he looked at her and said, "How do you know that?" She said, "Well, I was there." It didn't even occur to her that he wouldn't recognize she was there, because the knowing sense was so clear to her. She didn't think it was rare at all. And I would suggest our knowing nature is so common to us that when we start witnessing it, by letting go of the thinking we're doing or recognizing what the thinking we're doing is, it doesn't feel unusual at all. It feels usual and normal. And it becomes so easy to accept, you don't even notice it's happening for sometimes a week, 2 weeks, a month. You just start looking back and saying, wow, I haven't been having those experiences I used to have the way I used to have them. But your experience now, Gabe, was something we talked about a month ago or so when you said it's been completely removed. And I suggested that don't be surprised if more things begin to reveal themselves, because the clarity, a perfect lens on a telescope is destroyed by a speck of dust. And if we are beginning to get clearer where the basis of our thinking is now following the leader, actually aligned itself rather than maligned, the chances are we're going to see things we've done for a long time that we thought were so natural and normal that everybody was doing them and justified continuing to do them, rather than them being truth and reality, begin to see that they've actually been a false narrative we've been operating on that is falling apart. And as it comes into view and doesn't feel comfortable, that view is the opportunity to begin to say, oh, I am doing this. This is me. This isn't happening to me. This is happening by me. And as long as I feel like it's happening to me, I think it has a life of its own, because nothing can happen to me that doesn't have a life of its own or doesn't exist apart from me, right? So I have to give it an imbued sense of life, and that's exactly what ego is. False image of self. And we've developed thousands of different varieties of what the ego should be, and a healthy ego, and making friend with our ego and becoming nice to our ego. How do you become nice with something that's born of hate and fear? It's literally like engaging in a conversation over logic with somebody that's insane, and logically making believe that conversation will end up with a result that'll be rational. And to any degree we speak to each other when we're preoccupied with mentally obsessive thoughts, we're doing exactly that, thinking I'm going to make nice and I'm going to get through to him. Well, he doesn't even hear what I'm saying, or she doesn't hear what I'm saying. What she hears and thinks is what she thinks I'm saying, which has nothing to do with what I'm actually saying. And I'm thinking, I'm going to get through here. That's as insane as the person who's completely preoccupied with the thinking. So again, we can either cross-pollinate insanity, which is contagious, or begin to just simply talk about things in more accurate terms that give us a chance to recognize the natural state that we already share and have always shared and simply didn't think we did.
I like what you said about being aligned versus malaligned. So when we're up to something, we're malaligned.
Yeah, and what do we feel typically when we're up to something?
We feel off-center.
Exactly. Disconnected, inner conflict, alone, lonely, morose, self-pity, woe is me, I'm a victim, it's all happening to me. I'm not doing anything.
Right.
It's all happening to me. I would suggest, and this is what occurred to me one day, which made it really simple. If I didn't exist, nothing would matter to me. The fact that I exist, everything that matters, is primarily a function of what I'm doing. Primarily, because everything I see and touch and feel is my experience. And yet, my knowing nature doesn't see and feel and touch anything. It simply knows everything. And that isn't affected by how I think. It doesn't change at all. It stays exactly the same. So if I'm involved in it, somehow, if I'm disturbed, it's what I'm doing primarily that's disturbing. It's not to say that something that I look at, like a cat being run over in the middle of the street, isn't disturbing. But if it's disturbing and I'm disturbed, that lines up. If what I'm doing, I think I'm not doing and I'm disturbed, there is no alignment there. That's maligned. And I'm the one now causing the problem, think it's happening to me as though it's distinct from me. And that is a complete split personality. That is the basis of psychosis and schizophrenia, in my estimation. Not a medical view, but just simply split personality is what schizophrenia is about. And if I think my thoughts are true and real, every thought I have becomes its own voice and its own personality, its own potential to have me feel I'm a victim to it, because it now has a life of its own that I've given it, and I have become the creator of everything. And wouldn't that also represent the flamboyancy and the excessiveness and the grandiosity of egoistic behaviors, the mania of egoistic behaviors, the maniacal efforts to make believe that one person's ideas are good for everybody and they're going to kill everybody to prove it? There's something that doesn't quite add up in that. And in your point, Jackie, how do I become the change I want to see in the world is to begin to admit that you are.
Ooh, I am a change.
But here's the good part. So is everybody else already. And all we're doing is thinking we're not. And that collective grid that we feed when we act that way ends up confirming that for others. So they keep going and going and going in that wrong direction. And the whole essence of this conversation is to start to reveal and recognize that we have a common nature as we discuss it that becomes as common as the blame and fault we all used. While we blamed and faulted different people, we all consistently used blame and fault to shield our own culpability for what we were doing. To say you did it, they did it. It's exactly what we're doing with the thinking that the thinking is causing us problems and the ego is causing us problems and my brain is attacking me. Imagine my brain all of a sudden now has legs and armor to be able to attack me. It's crazy, but we talk that way.
I read somewhere that if we all believed that we could, no, if somebody believed that everybody could fly, including themselves, that somebody believed that he could fly, but he thought I could fly, nobody else can. But if you believe that everybody could fly, then you could fly.
Well, we're already flying at about 1,000,003 miles an hour through space.
Right.
And we're spinning at about 24,000 miles an hour, and we're orbiting at, I forget what the exact number is. But my sense is that what's beautiful about an absolute source and beginning to concede, not that you agree with it or believe in it or have faith in it or have hope in it, but begin to concede that if it is regardless of whether I believe in it, have faith in it, hope in it, or agree with it. It just is. And there's freedom. Why? Because it's not up to me to get there. It's not up to me to believe enough. It's not up to everybody to do something simultaneously, because now it becomes obvious that everybody is already doing everything simultaneously. And most of what we do in fractured, manic, dysfunctional ways are based on the exact same platform of wrong that we're doing in our own way. It's not different. These anxiety traits that are carried throughout the world, it seems, but especially in our country, as I'm aware of it, are not a coincidence. They're not just some accidental, dysfunctional, natural state of being. They're a dysfunctional state of thinking. And separating thinking just in terms of concept, because it's really not separate any more than our bodies are separate. The infinite isn't beyond us. It's within us and without us. It doesn't depend on us. Existence is its independence and dependence for humans. Our dependence on it is natural, not because we're held. Think of the difference between dependence on something human. It means we're beholden to them. It means we have some obligation to it. Like parents with kids. They're not always happy to have the responsibilities that they have. They'll perform the function because they have the responsibility. It doesn't always make them happy. But this dependence and independence thing in an infinite source is that it doesn't matter what we think about it. It is what it is. The only thing that matters to thinking is what it thinks. And when my thinking is thinking productively, I am acting productively, and it is confirming the thinking is correct because what I am doing is working. It's producing results that are worthy of being wanted by others, and others begin to produce those same results. And pretty soon we're acting on the natural collective that we've always been designed to express. That's a very different way of thinking about it, than thinking that I need to do it for everybody else, rather than just simply seeing that everybody else is already doing it. We're already part of that same thing. Now the question is, to Gabe's point, why do we lie? Why do we continue to make believe we're not part of something whole? Why do we continue to make believe, with all the evidence we've had, that somehow or another, someday we'll keep hammering this down and we'll keep maintaining new fights? Every generation, there's a new fight over something, and none of them have ever been won because we're still fighting. They think they're won, but they just lead to a new fight. That is not a winning formula. If a natural state of peace is at peace, it's never at war. And the irony about war is that the person who claims to be the victor isn't the one that actually brings the peace. It's the one who surrenders and concedes. That's where the peace comes from. If both people kept fighting, the peace would never come. It's the one that concedes first that brings the peace. That's exactly what we have the potential to do in thought and put at ease while we can rest at peace while we're on the earth rather than wait till we're in it as bodies. And think about what we generally say. We wish people rest in peace. Why? Because we're not very rested here. We need to sleep a third of the time we're awake just to recover from the shit that we're doing that's wearing our asses out, the exhausting nature of that thinking. And I don't know, maybe we need 8 hours. I don't know. That's a common story. We need 8 hours sleep. That may be right in relation to what we're doing. But it seems like a lot of sleep for people that are operating 24 hours a day. So I'm not suggesting don't get sleep. I think it's a critical part of the recovery system, the brain and the body and everything. I just wonder if the exhausting nature of being sick and tired isn't taxing us in ways that creates an inability in our body rather than an ability that we wouldn't even question the inspiration and excitement. And all of us have had those days where you feel elated, and sleep does not seem like the first thing you want to go do. Yeah. And yet when you're depressed, it seems like the only thing to go do. Let me just sleep it off like a hangover. So there's plenty of indications, plenty of observatory, like a telescope looking into space, plenty of things we can observe with our telescope and our lens that will confirm this if we're willing to actually look at what's happening accurately and what we're doing. And we don't have to stop doing what we're doing wrong to start seeing that it's wrong and simply live with it and say, I have a new relationship with what's wrong, rather than I got to get over it, I got to get away from it, I got to fight it, I got to stop it, I got to do everything. All that other kind of mania is unnecessary. You can have it and it will begin to just simply vanish, like sitting with a heartbroken 8-year-old child. Sometimes they don't want to hear your advice. They just want somebody to sit with them and be with them in a moment that's difficult. And we don't even bother to do that with our own selves. We beat the hell out of ourselves, constantly thinking we're going to get it right. And if you listen to what you say in your own thinking, you'll see that that conversation is not happy. And if you write those little sentences down, when you start noticing what you're saying, you'll start seeing more and more. They'll start coming in droves, and you'll see that you've had an underlying conversation that you would never tolerate from another human, and yet live with it perpetually.
So the action is to concede, is to surrender, to put up the white flag.
But here's the beauty, Gabe. Even if we don't surrender, it has no impact on the basis of our existence. None. What it has an impact on is the basis of our thinking and our thinking's ability to function. So when thinking's depressed, it's not because anything is really pressing on it other than thinking. But what does the body do? Stress over it. What does that indicate? A weight. Stress in engineering is a weight. It's caused by some sort of weight. Now, we're probably designed to bear some weight because we're designed to take on challenges and do things and accomplish things. We're designed to take on some weight. But if it's actual weight rather than a self-created opinion of weight that is dysfunctional and interior confusion and anxiety that's being created by, I become my worst enemy, hiding it from anyone else. And what am I doing? I'm building a fort to gain security, but I'm building the fort to keep the enemy within, not outside. Yeah. That's crazy. It's fucking sick.
I feel
the root of all of those escape routes, irritability, denial, defensiveness, all of those things are indications and accurate assessments of what we are thinking. And if you begin to just look at that as a broad stroke and just witness it and watch it, not make anything more out of it and say, look, it's already, if it's making a mess, it's already making enough mess. I don't need to jump in here and I don't need to ramp it up, get it going any faster. I don't need to get it. Just begin to witness it. You'll start seeing, like you did, Gabe, that the immediacy of it is obvious to us the whole time, but we're so adept at trying to deny it and keep it from. Denial is to take an illusion and make believe it's true is to be delusional. To be delusional is to think what isn't happening is all that's happening. That's the definition of insanity. seeing and hearing things that aren't happening. When I'm talking to myself about things that aren't happening, who the hell am I talking to? I'm talking to a self that is apparently disconnected from me, my essence. That seems strange.
I like what you said about writing down the things that we're saying to ourselves, and that they could, if we wouldn't tolerate somebody else saying that. And in that way, I feel it's important to make positive statements about ourselves that are true, and to have the tipping point of positive, like do our best to have the tipping point of positive things we say to ourselves.
I know you do. So we talked about, let me just address that, because it isn't not to do that. But here's the question. What is it that we're constantly trying to overcome by making positive statements? When people say, I don't want to be negative, aren't they saying, I'm negative and I'm trying to get away from it? What are we doing that's causing the need for those positive statements, rather than simply admitting that here's thought again, trying to think it's up to thought to figure it all out and bring it back into balance?
Right.
And then it's just, do you know anybody who says enough positive to actually be happy? I mean, in all respects, that isn't constantly maintaining the idea that this is the thing. I need to constantly be positive and think positive and do positive and all that.
Right. I think I more importantly, true statements.
Yes.
Saying true, kind statements about oneself. And
well, let's just say that truth is true, and that would be true for you right now. So if you just start saying that in absolute terms, it will relieve your thoughts of a lot of responsibility in making believe that it's up to them to find truth. It'll just naturally bring a sense of ease. Intuition, this knowing sense, is knowledge beyond reason. What does that mean? Knowledge is completely devoid of reason. What does thinking do? Constantly reasons. Constantly tries to be rational. Why? Because it's struggling with irrationality. It's struggling with the opposite. Just because anything we interact with that we make believe is true and real, that isn't true and real, sets our brain off on a frenzy of trying to figure out where it belongs, how to fit, and everything else. And it's what we're doing that causes it.
Right.
So I just want you, because this was a lingering issue from the last conversation too, Jackie, that really kind of occurred to me, is the efforts we make to try to overcome all of these things are fine if what we want to do is be in a constant thought-provoking fight with this opposite tendency, rather than begin to see that the teeter-totter, this balancing act that we're trying to create, has to be standing on solid ground to be out of whack. And start to see, like Gabe, you were just talking about in terms of the concession, it doesn't take a concession to be absolute in nature. But as we begin to notice that when we align our thoughts, exactly what you're talking about, Jackie, when we align our thoughts with what's happening, all of a sudden thoughts begin to work beautifully because they're designed to express that. It's like putting gas instead of water in a gas tank. Car can't start. Doesn't matter how well designed it is, it's not going to start. And we keep putting water in thinking we're stupid and ignorant and less than for not being able to get it started. And actually the result we're getting is exactly what we should be getting, giving the nature of the food for thought that we're nourishing ourselves with, that's empty and devoid of any value. So it's so preliminary, so primary, so here, so ready, so available, that it makes absolutely no sense. And to finally slap your head is to see that everything we've taken so seriously as to make believe our life was at risk was silly. It was nothing more than silly, because it was nothing more than a joke waiting to be told, but not being funny to the person pretending it wasn't.
I was writing yesterday, and I was thinking about how when I was still drinking, I had a manager that said I was a wildcat. He told everybody, like, Jackie's a wildcat. And yesterday, and I was like, wildcat. And then yesterday when I was writing like, yeah, I was now I'm just a spark of wildcat and I'm more practical. Where before I was this much practical, a little bit practical and very wildcat. And so, as you were saying about the teeter-totter, now I'm in the middle. And before I loved living at the sides. I thought I loved it. I loved going up and down, up and down.
Any sense of variation that you're relying on for satisfaction gives thought control over your entire existence that it doesn't have. You follow that?
No, will you say that again?
If you're trying in any way, remember how I just said a speck of dust completely destroys a telescope's ability to see clearly?
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot of teetering or tottering to be constantly in the mode of wondering whether you should be teetering or tottering.
Mm.
So when you rely on thinking and circumstance for how you are, you're relying on thought as your sole source. And it's a choice. You're welcome to do that. But I would say it's exactly the primary source of the problem. And if you're interested in the problem, then paying more attention to it, the interest paid on that will be the benefit of thinking you're better by thinking is thinking, thinking is thinking is thinking is thinking is thinking is thinking does. And it only creates another loop within the thinking that's very easy to get stuck in and make believe that somehow now that you have a little bit of awareness, you're going to use that new awareness to begin this new loop of thought rather than say, wait a minute. If I have a knowing presence, that knowing presence is right now, happening now. And we all share that, all three of us. And by the way, we share it with everything else that is, and everyone, all the other R's that are out there, all the other is and the R's that are out there. All that is and all that are. Everybody. And my sense is, to Gabe's question earlier about why do we lie, reckoning with that, begin seeing that all the stories we've ever told and all the ideas we've ever had that weren't true are at risk of being under the light and recognized as being a ghost in the dark, but absolutely not being there when the light turns on.
That's a scary proposition, Jack.
Exactly. Thank you. I had a panic attack when that occurred to me in a coffee shop. I told you guys about that. I thought I was an alien. I turned gray. A woman almost dropped to, I could see her knees buckle. All she did was look at me. She was coming in and I was going out, and her knees buckled when she looked at me. She could sense it. I was so full of fear, and everything that I had held in my body that I thought was my management style of success through denial and keeping it down, all of a sudden just erupted, and I could barely breathe. And I thought I was dying. I thought that my first thought was, I need an ambulance. But then I remembered people talking about it, and I just started to breathe. And I just started to repeat, I am as I am, 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 realizing that whatever that source is, whatever that I is in the ultimate sense, is in fact my source, not what I'm thinking. But the trigger was, I was just beginning to launch, and it was 5 a.m, in the direction of saying, the ego is an illusion. It's completely made up in thought. Everything I ever thought about myself, boom. And it just blew up inside of me. Why is it explosive? It's almost like a suicide bomber. The fear of being explosive is facing all the fears I've been holding in my body, storing in my body like it's a battery. And batteries all rely on acids. For as I know, maybe lithium batteries now don't, but there's always something corrosive in the battery. And what's corrosive in my body is the stress and the acids that my body releases that undermine my alkaline ability to be balanced and function properly and deliver the nutrients where they need to go. And it begins to suffocate. The tension suffocates my muscles so they don't have blood and start to get tight and end up stretching and popping and breaking, and all of that stuff leads to diseases. It's all a function of how diseases becomes an environment for dis-ease, because it's based on dis-ease, the lack of ease in my thinking. But that fear is something to expect. The beauty about it is that if you've been managing it all this time to have it grow and grow and grow and grow, and you're willing to start seeing it for what it is, it will dissipate. And I cried a lot. And then I started laughing a lot because I realized I'd made so much out of nothing and made so little out of everything. And it occurred to me in this thing of, the first thing was I wasted a lot of time. And then in a very short period of time in the infinite, time is irrelevant. It's like, how can you waste time getting to a place that finally admits that it's always been there? It was never not there. It was just a delusion of preoccupation of mentally obsessive thought. That was it.
For me, Jack, yeah, I'm contemplating more this episode. The childhood trauma I experienced with my father about happening to me by him is exactly what I bring to every thought, especially professionally. And letting that go, surrendering that is very scary and very hard. But I was able to do it early in our discussions, like wipe the slate sort of clean, but there's still a few crumbs there that came up like yesterday. But I totally see it as a struggle right now versus a complete wiping of the slate. That epiphany of a few months ago when talking with you guys, I just wiped all that fear off my plate. But there's still some old remnants trying to fight back. And it's just me and my ego thinking.
It's just thoughts, yeah.
Yeah, thinking I'm all that I am is all that I think and all of that. But
just begin to notice that they're just thoughts, first of all. And my experience was, and I don't know that this is accurate for everybody, but my experience was that all of the bitterness I had toward my parents, for instance, was my way of maintaining my connection to them for my love of them. And yes, it was sick, and yes, it was twisted, but I used it. And the irony was, very often those things I held against them became personality traits that I ended up with. And I did exactly what I didn't like my father did.
Yeah.
And I suffered in the same righteous ways that I felt my mother was. And because that connection is what I thought was up to me to maintain the connection with them, because I thought it was up to me in thinking. Maybe there was a time I was too young to know better, but my sense is if we have an infinite source, we've known better all along. We just haven't acted like it. And we felt overwhelmed. And we were also surrounded by people who certainly didn't act better and all had their foibles and idiosyncrasies and oddities and such, and all called them truth and reality. And to a little knowing being, hearing somebody say, well, this is the way it is, you got to look out in the world and say, what? Are you kidding me? Somewhere in you screaming, saying, wow, that can't be. It just can't be. But nobody wants to hear that from a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. Who are you? You're too young to, what do you know? Well, I'll tell you everything. Everything I know I knew then. And everything we know now is exactly what we've always known. It isn't something new. It isn't something old. In the new and old compartment, it isn't old, it's new. In the present compartment, it's always new because it's always bountiful. It's always giving. It's always everything, always available. Possibility is always possible. Always.
My 7-year-old son, as an example, Jack, a couple of days ago said to my wife, whose mother we're living with, and she's a very difficult woman and very negative and very critical. And my 7-year-old son says, Grandma's often hard on me. You're like, whoa, like we're barely surviving with her negativity. But man, it's crystal clear for someone, who has less baggage to carry around.
Well, I would say it's clear for all of us, but our baggage gives us the impression that we need to get it into the hotel before we can think about anything else. And we're constantly lugging the stuff around thinking it's got to arrive with us. And we're too busy maintaining it rather than beginning to actually recognize in a spontaneous absolute state that we're very much aware of it. We're just not admitting. We've galvanize these, we were talking about it earlier, these mental paths and all that. We say it's a mental path that becomes habitual, once more giving the brain this condition that's insurmountable by us so that we can excuse continuing to do it without saying, I can't do any better. And my contention is, if we have a condition that can't be changed, but it can get worse, then the question is what I'm doing making it better or worse? Am I giving that environment a chance to grow faster or slower? Am I giving that disease, whatever that condition is, the chance to be worse or better? And I would suggest that stress and the way we create it internally does not help any physical ailment or any predisposition get better at all.
Yeah, it's only going to get worse. It's its only possible outcome, it seemingly.
We've probably also developed DNA to adjust for all of the impositions we've created in our body, and it's trying to make sense of, what do you do with this?
Yeah.
So it's adjusting in ways that have created allergies and all kinds of stuff that may not be there in normal states, but are adjusting to things that are insane in terms of the way we've treated food and chemicals, and we've altered the makeup of nature, and all of a sudden our body's trying to adjust to it. So some of the adjustments that we think are predispositions have adapted to things that have been malfunctions on our thinking basis. Things we thought were the best things we could do for one reason or another, but in fact have these other consequences in other ways. And there's always consequences. And a corrupt thought is always going to be corrupt. An oak seed is never going to be a pine tree. Ever. Anyway, go ahead. Back to you, Gabe.
No, I was thinking of this when we were just talking about it a few minutes ago. It's like the running of the bulls. Like if you're standing in the middle of the street and the guy next to you says, run, there's a bull coming. I mean, you just start running and you start going and not think that maybe I should step aside and watch this race rather than be a part of it. But when you look around and see the bulls coming, and it's like you're in it, you're moving.
Well, and if you think of that in relation to an actual threat, there isn't a lot of contemplation going on.
Yeah, you start running.
You're not thinking to yourself, what's the best thing? I wonder what this will, you're not worried. You're just literally in a state of awareness that says, move, get going, make your feet work.
But I'm saying, like, the way I feel in the fear, it feels like that. It's
yes.
Similar.
Yes. But the difference is, one of them you actually have a potential to outrun. The other one you're constantly taking with you wherever you run to. And compulsions, interestingly, are trying to, I mean, now that we've talked about this, we've gotten to the heart of the conversation of addiction and the mental aspect of it. Why wouldn't we want to drink? If our feelings are reflecting our thinking and our feelings are feeling as bad as our thinking is thinking, why wouldn't we want something to take care of that feeling if we misunderstand what the feeling is doing? That would be normal. Let me change the feeling. I'll fix it. The irony of it is that when I change the feeling and feel better, I'm actually learning to commit further to the thought that's wrong. And that's now a new way of me promoting the problem rather than solving it. There's another twist in that backward nature. The thing I'm doing to fix it is exactly what's helping me maintain it. That's why it consistently seems to be impossible to stop, because what we're doing is continuing to cause it. And if I think it ain't me, babe, I am actually asking for it to continue. And I'm using all those pleas and all those stories and all those connections to everybody around me that I see as culpable because they were near me when I started thinking that, and they must be responsible. And all of a sudden I've assigned it to them. I'm only doing with them now what I'm trying to do with my own actions. Make them responsible when I'm trying to become irresponsible for what I'm actually responsible for.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it before, Jack. I always said to my sponsors and therapists, my dad is still beating the shit out of me.
Yeah.
And then I realized, wait a minute, I'm beating the shit out of me.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is, and I didn't follow this up when you were talking about it, Gabe, but in all of those stories are regret, resentment,
shame,
and a lack of forgiveness. And who is it that we regret and resent and don't forgive? Our constant willingness to continue to hold somebody responsible for something they're not even doing while we overlook the responsibility of doing it now.
Yeah.
Who's there? Me. My thoughts, the thing I call me, my thoughts, my choice to actually inflict those ideas on my thinking and ask my thinking to figure a way out of it when there's no way out, because it's just a vicious cycle of constant mental chronic disturbance. And so what do I find? I loved my mother. I loved my father. My mother was righteous. My dad was a captain of the Marine Corps, and he was a tough motherfucker. And my mother was tougher. And she held the grip, man. And he even catered to her. He let her have it because he knew he was not going to take it from her. And yet I loved her so much, I was ashamed not to be able to admit it, not be able to share it and be open about it. And I don't think it's a coincidence when you go to a funeral that we talk so highly of people that weren't always that highly thought of when they were alive.
Yeah, that's always been so weird to me.
My sense is when their body's gone, we're no longer irritated with the shit that irritated us because of our thinking. It was my thoughts about what they were doing that pissed me off, not what they were doing. If I had just let what they were doing be what they were doing, it would have had no impact. But it was my thinking of what they should be doing and what I wanted them to do that really collided with them. My sense is we have a knowing awareness of them and all of a sudden think of them in those terms because they are never going to do those things in that way again. Their body's never going to act in those ways again. And it is an awareness and unifying. Think of what happens at the funeral. Everybody comes together around this person that's seen in all these variety of different ways by everybody's experience. And yet everybody is unified in the coming together to both either celebrate or bemoan their seeming passing. And yet the new awareness of them is a much more unified field between people. And people have a sense of camaraderie and connection to one another as a fact of ever knowing them. And yet the knowing of them is the present state of our knowing, that we know much more than we think. And we're connected on a level to family that's much greater than the one we call ours. It's everybody and everything, nature, all of it.
I have a way better relationship with my dad now that he died. Because I've always had to have boundaries up because he had narcissistic personality disorder. So when he died, I was able to not have boundaries and just experience him. And I was able to love him without worrying.
Yeah.
Without, my therapist had always told me to never expect anything from him, just to be, happy when I did, never expect anything and then be pleasantly surprised when it was a decent conversation. So then when he passed, I just wrote constantly. And it was actually pretty beautiful.
Well, and being able to witness it means perspective gives us great advantage, right? When we're mired in it, we don't seem to have any perspective. And my suggestion would be that thinking to ourselves is a solitary effort, and it's a single point. There's no dimensions to it at all. So there's no perspective. Feelings offer us perspective. How we see others offer us perspective. It's not what they're doing that we're seeing, it's what we're doing and thinking they're doing that's giving us the perspective. And to begin to see that is to begin to see how we diminish our relations with other people based on what we think they are, when in fact we're doing the exact same thing. And I would suggest that all mentally obsessive thinking is narcissistic, because it's all thinking about a self. The only reason, how they say in sobriety that I may not be much, but I'm all I think about?
Right.
Because that thing that we think is us only exists in thought. So the chronic nature of thinking is trying to think that there's no interruption, which means that thing really does have existence. It really does live. It really is true. It's the same thing as a lie. Past, present, all the opinions we have about reality and truth that are self-generated aren't reality and truth. They're just self-serving conclusions that we've decided are our truth. You hear that people say that, well, that's my truth. I'm like, how could your truth not be mine and it be true?
Yeah.
Help me with that. It's impossible. It wouldn't be truth, and certainly it isn't. It's just a self-serving concept of truth. So it isn't truth in reality, it's just our ideas. So it's all narcissism, which is a preoccupation with self. And what's the self? Thinking of itself, thinks of a self born of thought. That doesn't create reality. That just creates the opinion that I have a self. That's a far long. Reality allows me the potential to do that because reality not being threatened is given us the freedom to express ourselves in any way we choose. It must be loving to allow us to be so unloving and unkind and not swoop down and just stamp us out with a thumb. For all that we talk about in terms of fear of God and all that stuff, and people said, God, strike me dead. You've never heard anybody actually struck dead by saying, God, strike me dead if I'm lying. You know, it's God doesn't seem to do those things, but humans seem to be very good at doing those things in the name of God. That isn't God they're naming. They're using the name of God in vain to justify human endeavors. Either we are of it or we're the maker of it. And if we're the maker of it, then it's shit. Because what we make is a lot of shit and we talk about it openly. We've got shit to do. We got shit to get together.
Talk about it openly. It's really funny.
We do. I mean, listen to people. I got shit to do and they kind of shuffle their feet. I got to go do my shit.
Yeah.
You know, apparently if we have to do shit, it's a waste. And all we need to do is stop clenching our fists or whatever it is hanging on to the shit. I mean, even bodies know to get rid of it. So where do we go next?
Well, for me, what I've just thought, if I've been holding on to what I've thought of myself for going on 4 or 5 decades now.
Well, which is it?
I don't know. I'm 48 this month. So.
Wow.
4.8.
4.8, yeah, decades. It seems like both a simple and strange concept is to let go of that thinking, because you feel like you can't let go of what you thought of yourself.
You know what's convenient about that?
Yeah, it keeps thinking.
Perfect way of thinking, you'll hang on.
Yeah.
I'll give you a little clue. When you begin to realize that all that thinking is delusional, you'll begin to see you never held on to anything but the present thought you were holding on to something. That's all it ever is. And it's never all of the stuff we use to say, oh, I can't let go of all of that. There isn't anything other than what we're thinking it is right now.
Yeah.
And here's the beauty. Here's the salvation of the absolute. You can let it go, absolutely, and pick it right back up if you want.
Yeah,
there is no condemnation.
Yeah.
You're free to have those stories and operate on that basis and be as dysfunctional as you want. You're absolutely welcome. But the fact is, just like in getting sober, generally, what seemed to be absolutely necessary all of a sudden becomes laughable to even imagine being helpful.
Yeah.
The compulsions, whatever they are.
Yeah.
It's drinking, drugs, sex, gambling, whatever it is, food, all of it. When you gain perspective, you start seeing things in proper perspective, in proper proportion, rather than making believe nothing is everything and everything is nothing. So to begin to consider that all thoughts are illusions, they're all imagination, literally images. And if you think about what you think, you've always got images attached to it. It's like a play being written and worked on in a script, and you're trying to get the script right when you're thinking about the past. How do I think about this past in a way that will finally free me from it? Well,
not thinking about it at all?
Well, it's beginning to realize that you're not condemned to it in anything other than the thought you're having about how to become free from it.
Yeah, the condemnation. Yeah, that's a good one. It's just like Anthony and the accident. It's your thought is to condemn yourself to it and to try your best to make it happen.
Well, even if you think you're going to avoid it, the fact that you're paying so much attention to something that could happen means you're not paying attention to other things that also could happen. And the preponderance of your focus is in one direction. So you're going to be more reactive in that direction in ways that would have that happen rather than in the other ways that would not have it happen.
Yeah.
That's how our focus can kind of be misleading rather than say, look, it's a choice. All they did was make a choice. That's all the thoughts are, is a choice. And you know what choices are? Will. We want to choose what we're choosing when we choose it, or we wouldn't do it. Why? Because we're always free not to choose. Why would we choose something we didn't want if we didn't rationalize it in some way to want it? So to say we don't want the circumstances and the consequences of those circumstances is to lie. The fact that we got something that happened that we didn't think should happen only means we weren't thinking straight about what would happen. And our clarity about those things becomes like the instantaneous nature you were talking about, your awareness, Gabe, the instantaneous nature of knowing, you know what, I'm in doubt right now. Probably not a good time to make a rash conclusion. If I'm in doubt, I just sit with the doubt and wait. I don't tend to jump to the end thinking that the best thing I can do is get it resolved by creating a bigger problem, because that's what mentally obsessive thinking does. It thinks I'm going to come to the rescue here and just come to a conclusion, and doubt's going to be my source. So I'm going to make a doubtful conclusion and end up creating more doubt and problems. And then I'm going to wonder why now this problem seems like nothing, because the new problem is so much bigger that I'm now headlong into it, making believe that I've got to get it solved. So what do? Jump to another rash conclusion, because that's how I've been. That my training day is constantly training for this idea that someday I'll get it right. Rather than say, it's never been that way. That's all just been delusion.
Yeah, both are exponential, or whatever you want to say, is
progressive.
The awareness is just as progressive for me.
No, it's much more, because one's natural and the other's the other one constantly requires a fight. The unnatural fight always requires a fight, and this is how you can tell whether you're
or energy put into it, like, you know, you just
But in the infinite, there's no energy at all, because it's all the energy there is.
Yeah,
so it's already beginning to recognize, oh, this is the sum total of everything that actually exists, rather than the sum total of everything I think exists. Just begin to notice those distinctions. One of them is super easy. It doesn't mean we can't decide on challenges. And my experience and suspicion is that the challenges we're willing to take on will be much greater and much more beneficial to other people if we succeed, because we'll be thinking about what can be done now, which will help us take the step to the next step and the next step and the next step. No mountain's ever been climbed by taking the last step. It always involves the first step and the next step and the next step and the next step. When we start thinking in terms that are functional, those steps will be obvious, or at least we'll be doing what we can be doing with what's happening, rather than making believe in thought that what we will be doing someday will get better if we keep thinking about what isn't happening. That's just lunacy. And it's really the story of the world. It's really the story of the world. 90%, 92% of modern history has been fought in wars between people that think their ideal is good enough to kill other people for, which it must not be very ideal if that's the result. If violence is the result, something must be wrong.
So, yeah, what I'm getting from this conversation is the conceding, or the contemplation, what you've always talked about, Jack, is just think for a moment that what you're thinking is not real, not true, and the lie. It's the same thing you told me the first time, really.
Well, the other thing too, though, is really realizing that we are created to imagine. So thinking is really designed to imagine. It's really a creative effort. And the art of life literally is that creativity in terms of the human existence, human life. And if you look at the life around us, it's pretty creative. I mean, we've actually watched millions of species go extinct. It's so creative, both in terms of the ability to have millions of species missing, and yet us still functioning with new species being discovered. It's pretty creative. That's our nature.
Mm-hmm.
So the imagery of thoughts, once taken seriously enough to be true, is the conflict. Rather than realize that it's just it's like being an actor on a stage and thinking that you become the person and the stage becomes the world, and all of a sudden, exactly as Shakespeare said, it wouldn't make much sense to stay on after the play's over and think that your life is over because everybody left. So we're taking those characters we create, which we literally create. Personas are characters of thought. We take the scripts that we write and make believe they're true, and we have a tough time letting go of them because we really believe our reality is based in them. And when you begin to even see that it's not, you don't have to let go of them, because you'll see they've been nothing more than this foggy notion that's just been waiting for a breath of air to literally diffuse itself. It just vanishes because it isn't there, and thinking is allowed to begin to do what it wants, and it will do it in ways that are well beyond anything we ever thought was possible. Because all we were thinking about was the impossibility.
But the second you start thinking obsessively, that fog
it only seems to in thought.
reforms.
It's kind of like you're back on the stage, and that stage is a scary thing. So the fog rolls in and the darkness rolls and all the characters. And it's like it's setting the stage. Your thoughts are setting the stage for the experience you're trying to make believe is true. And that shows how capable thinking is. If we can do the absolute wrong thing with it and make believe it's true, that's an enormous amount of latitude we've been given. And if we can do the wrong thing so quickly and regularly and think it's normal, imagine what happens when we start doing the normal thing and don't even think about it, because now thinking is just operating. It knows exactly what to do because it's following a sense of knowledge that's well beyond thinking of itself. It's now just thinking about, how do I get this job done? That's what it's designed to do, function. It's like a machine. If you apply the right engineering principles to a machine, it's going to work. If you don't, it won't. Very simple. And we're malaligning, disconnecting concepts in thought and making believe they're true and real, and suffering consequences that show how well the body is designed to manifest the answers to those prayers we constantly create in thought. Yeah. If we're capable of creating the mess and justifying everything that we've done on the planet hasn't been us, it hasn't been us, somebody else. If we can go to that extreme, we can heal it and fix it in ways that we haven't even begun to imagine, and also create things that are probably that are right now considered fantasy, just like the phone was, when we were kids.
So the action Jackie was talking about to create the peace that she wants is natural thinking, natural action.
To not think at all.
Well, it's to express the natural state of knowing that we already have, which isn't, knowing doesn't think, it just knows. What would it have to think about if it knows everything? Right?
Yeah, and I do transcendental meditation, and with that I was given a mantra, and the mantra is not allowed to mean anything. It's a nonsense word.
Exactly.
That I don't tell anybody. And I kind of switch it sometimes and do words that do mean things but now, because I like the feeling of repeating something that I want, but now, or just like saying thank you. Sometimes I meditate and just say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, which is just a simple prayer that always kind of works for me. But now thinking about how thinking doesn't create peace, I like going back to my mantra that doesn't have any meaning.
Well, the reason they give it to you is to diffuse the thinking, the logic. Language is based in rationale and thinking. A knowing present doesn't speak a language. It just has a sense of knowing. You just know you know. It isn't like I need to get there. It's just where we are, right?
Right.
So that knowing sense is what you're tapping by allowing the brain to think about something nonsensical and kind of give it the day off. Rather than say, here's some thoughts to think about, brain, and while you're preoccupied thinking about that, I'm going to try to meditate over here.
Yeah.
When now your brain's busy and your experience is going to be busy. And the point is, your natural state is that awareness. We are aware that we are aware, and we know that we know. Right now, we know it. We absolutely know it. But we think all of these things need to be accomplished before we can actually express it, which are all the things then that we think stand in the way of us getting there. Remember I think it was last week's announcement, the Rumi, it was the Rumi quote. I think it was something to the effect, if I can pull it up here, I'll get it. Something to the effect of, I'm not seeing it. Why don't seek for love? Because it's saying it's not lost, which is peace, right? That knowing sense is peace and love. Don't seek for love, but seek for all the barriers you have built against it.
Yeah.
And that begins to recognize, if you can then conceptualize that all those barriers, if you need to think about each one of them and think that it's up to you to deconstruct them rather than realize the only construct of them is thinking they're true and real, if you just start thinking about thought as not true and real, if the thought you're having was true and real, you wouldn't have to think about it. You would never, ever have to think about it any longer than the expression of it, because there is no time in this present state of being. It's just a constant expression of knowing. And it's very perplexing to thought to try to grasp this because we already have it, not because we can't get it. The thing that thinking does is say, okay, now where do I get this? Where do I have to go? What do I have to be to get to it? Because thinking knows it ain't it, but it's an expression of it. It's a byproduct of it. It's subsequent to it. We all came into this where that whole structure already existed. Our human experience did. But I would suggest we were part of that structure well before it. My sense is it's well beyond the confines of this universe anyhow. And it's not beyond it, it's within it, it's without it. It doesn't function in time and space, so all the words that we can use about metaphysical, beyond the physical, all that stuff doesn't apply, because it also has to be in the physical and of the physical. But it isn't an in and out thing. It isn't a here and not there thing. It's just a present thing that's absolute. So that awareness you get in meditating is our natural state when we're awake. And this conversation is about starting to actually notice that we're always in a state of meditation and prayer. My thoughts are my prayers, and they're always answered, which is why I complain about not getting what I want, because I think what I'm thinking isn't what I'm thinking. And my present natural state means that I'm completely aware of what's going on, and whether I admit it or not in my thinking will determine whether or not my thinking thinks it's there. That's it. So thinking is the only thing I'm having the disturbance in. Thinking is the only thing when I feed it thoughts that aren't true, it's going to do this. It's going to loop. It's going to do the vicious cycle. It's just going to do that. And when I'm doing the vicious cycle, I can look backward and say, oh, I must be maintaining a thought that isn't true. I must be up to something. And it just begins to take
like a virus, Jack. It just grabs other cells and distorts them.
It's the greatest pandemic on earth. And the irony is, admitting it is ultimately taking off the mask. And what's everybody arguing over? Whether they should be wearing masks, mask mandates. They've all got a mask on of some sort. They're all hiding behind some ideas and thoughts of who they think they are. That's the whole point of this discussion, is looking at this deceptive nature of ego based in thought and recognizing it's no more than we think of now, right now, no other time.
Yeah, deception is a very good adjective there.
Well, think of illusion. Illusion is not a problem, because it's admittedly what it is. It's illusion. It becomes delusion when I think illusion is real. Yeah. And it's that same transition of the thought thinking truth can be reality, or a lie can be real and true. So what do? I create pain. And what do I say? Must be real because it hurts. Rather than say, no, pain is an indication of something wrong. Pain is not about suffering to confirm life. And what have we done? Said life is suffering. Buddha said it. But he really wasn't saying life is suffering. He's saying when we think we're attached, to life and have attachments to life, we suffer. Very different than what it's interpreted as. Life is suffering. No, it isn't suffering. Life has the possibility of suffering, but only when we act in ways that actually create the pain that is there to tell us we're doing something wrong. It's actually our owner's manual. Okay. It's actually like chapter 3, it's 3.8, where it's saying, when you do something wrong, you're going to feel wrong. When you're thinking something wrong, you're going to feel wrong. When you're thinking something bad, you're going to feel bad. When you're thinking something disconnected, you're going to feel lonely. Then the last chapter is, when you feel lonely, you're thinking something alone. Then it's the same thing in different directions. If our immediacy right now is a sum total, if the present state of being right now is a sum total of everything that's ever happened, then all we have literally to look at is what's happening now. And if we're willing to let that be our experience in thought, our thoughts will start thinking of it, and we will be introducing the absolute nature and relieve thought of thinking it's going to search in a past and future that doesn't exist, and recognize the only thing it's capable of doing is right here now, and become functionally literate, because it will be reading the signs accurately. And who will it be reading them? My choice to actually start seeing what I'm seeing, rather than looking away and thinking because I'm looking left, what's happening on the right isn't going on. It's really beginning to practice this in a functional way as a human. Functionally literate way means we can read the signs, our body language. They're posted signs that are obvious to us. And if we do not want to slow down when there's a 20-mile-an-hour sign ahead, we're going to crash if we're doing 80. And what do? Oh, I didn't think. This caught me off guard because I wasn't looking at the sign. Oh, really? Really? So where are we time-wise? Speaking of no time. Okay.
Can I say my closing thought?
Yeah, we have a little time. You got about 20 minutes.
Oh, wow. Never mind.
No, but you can start. Let's dive into that, because that's
mine is
your segue.
Right here, right now, nothing is missing, and thinking is useless.
Well, thinking is useful, though.
All right, so right here, right now, nothing is missing.
The obsessive thinking is useless, and that is dysfunctional and all that. So if you begin to see that thinking is actually very useful, but when we're misusing it, it's useless.
I like that.
So the first thing you said, repeat.
Right here, right now, nothing is missing.
Yes, exactly. Because everything is here. And what's interesting is nothing is a very integral part of everything.
Right.
So even saying nothing is missing would suggest it's missing.
Right here, right now, nothing is missing.
My question would be, where's nothing?
Nothing is everything.
Yes. They work together. Everything's based on a thing. Wouldn't be a thing if there was not no thing. Within the relative scheme, the opposites are all part of the same thing. They all prove themselves out. It's like the idea that we can have a secret and then we secrete bodily fluids, sweat, blood, tears over thinking we can keep the secret.
That's Victoria's Secret.
The secretions are, in fact, the secret expressing itself. The stress, the anxiety, all of those things we think. And what's our biggest secret? Who I think I am is who I am. And what does that mean? If I stop thinking, I'm dead. And what's interesting, if you try to think about death, you can't. Because you'd always be thinking about it to be thinking about it. So it's a good example of how thinking's limits reveal their limits. And yet, concede, to your point, Gabe, if you concede the limits, you begin to see they're also in the unlimited. If I can't think about death because whenever I'm thinking about it, I must be alive to be thinking about it, then whatever I'm thinking about death as being can't be death because I'm not there. I'm not doing that. And ultimately, if the infinite spirit is infinite, there is no death in that. There's transformations of life forms like bodies and things that change, which ours will and are right now. We actually get replicated every 7 or 8 years, according to Deepak. I believe our whole body's cellular structure is completely replaced. I mean, I wouldn't say my wrinkles are a good example of a fresh new face, but
Yeah, for me, conceding is the word of the day from Sesame Street. So.
And remember that the concession is beginning simply to concede that it is and always has been, regardless of the fight we've been waging. It hasn't been somewhere else. It's been here. It's given us the freedom to wage that fight and make believe it was true.
Yeah, concede the fight.
So we could see the errors of our way. It's starting to see that our concessions are relevant. And yet, if we begin to introduce the idea to thinking, it makes thinking the potential of the actual relevant. It gives thinking the potential of expressing the relevance of that essence, which we've been seemingly cutting off, but we haven't been cutting off. We've just been using it to prove that the lie was true. And
which
that's pretty deceiving.
Yeah, which is what Jackie was talking about, the usefulness of thinking, right? The correct thinking.
The uselessness of it, yeah.
Yeah.
But Jackie, to your point too about not thinking, knowing doesn't think.
Right.
Because it knows. So in that regard, that knowing sense isn't a thinking sense. Thinking's a bodily function. It's like our eyes and our senses and all that kind of stuff. But we even within the bodily functions talk about having a sixth sense. Not a sixth sense, though I think we have that too. Mm-hmm. That might be the seventh sense. But that sixth sense is a sense of knowing that we don't always know we know, but we know it. And that would be, I would think, absolute intuitive thought beyond reason. We just know we know it. We don't know why we know it. And we don't necessarily think we should know it. And we don't know what always to do with it, but we know it. There's a certainty to it. So now, with that addition to your questions, where do we leave? What's the thread for now, for next week, our next time, our third conversation?
Yeah, conceding the fight for me. That's my main thing today is. I think I sort of understand a little bit about the past blame and keeping the story going and thinking thinks for itself. And it's just conceding.
Okay, so what about I can't think my way into peace. I can piece my way into peace.
You wouldn't be out of it.
Okay.
So peace is your natural state. It's our natural state. And I would suggest if it weren't, we'd never know what was wrong. And so wrong is actually the clarity of knowing what's right. When we suffer, it's an admission we know better. We wouldn't be suffering if we didn't. If wrong was right, we'd be thrilled suffering. That joy you're seeking would be your natural state, because you'd say, look at me, I am in the most pain I've ever been in. I have achieved the greatest thing I could ever want.
Suffering is denying your natural state.
Well, it's an admission that you know better, but are acting worse. And this distinction between being and acting, because being is, right? It's not contestable. It's not negotiable. It's just a presence of knowing. We don't have to understand it for it to be. And humans do. And what they do is think first. Thinking is an action, which is often overlooked in sobriety because we're often told to take contrary action, forgetting that the reason we're told to take contrary action is because the thinking we're still thinking is contrary. So why would we need to take contrary action if our thinking was straightened out? So the thinking is still left behind as an unresolved issue once the symptom has been removed. And the disease of all compulsion centers in the mind. It's the obsession created by imagining thought is real and true, and it can be. Either it is or it could be. And I would say the could be is even the greater. That it is could be easily debunked by saying, well, then what is all this that's around me that I'm not thinking about? If truth and reality. But the can someday, maybe, is the thing that, to me, maybe is worse than a yes or no.
Right.
It's that idea that, oh, well, what I need to do in drinking is drink more. That's the problem. It isn't the drinking that's the problem, is that I haven't drank 24 hours a day for 7 days a week. That's the problem. So what do? I keep trying to actually add to the problem, thinking it's the solution. That's the can, maybe someday. So given this, what's interesting, almost not coincidental at all, but this is almost the exact same theme that Alyssa and Sturgis left on, which was her question was, in the infinite, what's possible, right? And it's kind of like, okay, if that's the case, then what can we do? Well, everything, anything. And the chances are it's going to be better than anything we would do trying to think it's up to us to do it. Because now we're willing to express in thought this infinite source rather than try to get to it and wonder why our ability to function is impaired while we're chronically trying to get where we already are. I mean, that would be like asking a car just to spin its wheels forever to try to get where it was, rather than just not get in it or not turn it on. Your car would last forever. But we'd wear it out getting there, and that's what we do with our thinking. So hers was, what happens in an infinite, so what's possible in an infinite state? And Sturgis was, why do we focus on when fools rush in, and not the second half, which is where angels fear to tread? And I would say that the angels, if they are, even in metaphoric terms, extensions or the ghosts of God or the spiritual expressions of God, right? Where they fear to tread is where Satan was imagined to go, which was to be apart from God, was to become independent and use that source that he'd been given to become all that there is, when in fact he was too a function of that great being, that great source. And what do? Demonic things as a result. And what do we imagine? The devil made us do it. And if we can be free, if it's roaming this universe, and I don't want to say it isn't, because if it is, it is. But if we're doing the things that we assign to it, we're using it as an excuse to do the despicable things we claim it's responsible for. And that's pretty despicable. And if we can be freed from symptoms, we can be freed from it all. But in that discussion, which now will be, I think that was the end of their third, that's what they left you in the first discussion. But now we're going to go into the next discussion. And what we're going to talk about is, okay, and I don't want to direct this for you guys because you're going to have your own questions. And I'll go back and remember what you said while I'm finished talking over you. But let's look at, if we're here and we're now, and we were interested in expressing that infinite source, what would we do together collectively? What would we start doing in concert, not just with us, but everyone? How would we start acting in ways that would allow us to begin to exhibit and express that, not because we're telling everybody what we're thinking, in new ways, but simply because we're witnesses and observing it and accurately functioning on its basis and become functional in a way that people even say, wow, that's different. Something's happening here between us that's without them even thinking often. There's just a sense of, wow, there's a little more room for me here. People say, you never listen to me, you never hear me. And I say, well, say something worth hearing. But
Yeah,
that we're often so stuck in the ideas about other people, we're not connecting with them at all. Go ahead again.
yeah, that's what I was saying long ago, I think on a separate phone call with you, was how to spread this word, the word of this awareness, having been freed from the panic attacks, is to practice these principles in all our affairs and sort of preach the gospel, as it were. But those things are not what you were just saying, as I understood it, is to simply practice these principles in all our affairs and be the ever-present awareness, and others will see the light. This is what you're saying.
Well, and I would say to Jackie's point about be the change you want to be, is start to see that we are the change we want to be.
Yeah, I like that.
The serenity prayer, I rewrote it this morning in a text to somebody because it occurred to me that if we're asking God for peace, we're claiming God hasn't given us peace. And that would suggest that having no peace is possible, when in fact, it's only thought that thinks it isn't at peace. So I rewrote, God, thank you for the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. And in parentheses, the peace and love of God. I can't change that. If it's absolute and infinite, that's the nature of existence. And the courage, in parentheses now, no longer being discouraged by the thought obsessively trying to do what it cannot do by getting the peace and love, because now it already has it. So what do I have? Naturally, I'm not discouraged. And what's courage? The opposite of being discouraged. Now I have the courage. What am I going to start doing? What I can. The second half of the serenity step says that. To begin doing what I can do. And the wisdom, which is intuition, to know the difference. I know that inner conflict is now my guide to thoughts trying to do what can't be done. So what am I going to do? Keep trying to think they will and get stuck in the loop of the first, keep asking God to let me do what I can't do, which is to turn a lie into truth when God has already given me all truth? That would seem insane. So I thank God for having it and recognize that now that I'm not discouraged, I've got courage to do exactly what I can do. What can I do? Things that can happen, things that are useful, things that are meaningful. This is where the usefulness of thinking starts to actually express my ability to be able to move my hands and walk my feet and have conversations with people. I can start speaking in terms that actually make sense because I'm not busy making believe the senses that I have need to be remade in my thinking. I'm starting to utilize them as a function of guidance and express them. So I'll go back and pull up those questions again, but I want to take this next time to set the stage for what do we do as human beings who are now being human and expressing the nature of that wholeness. And part of it, and the reason I pose this now is because it gives you a little time in thinking about it, is to look at some of the resistance and look at some of the predisposition. And I found that I was mourning the loss of some of the thoughts that I had held dear for a long, long time. And it created sadness, and I was upset over it. And I realized as I faced that it wasn't new upset. I'd been holding that upset in my stomach, the pit in my stomach, and all of those things, and in my shoulders for years, thinking someday I'd get it right and then it would be better, not realizing that I was collectively making things worse all along. Or cumulatively, since it was always just the present reflection of my state of seeming mind and body. So what do we do when that's gone? And I would say certainly more that can be done. And the beauty of seeing that everybody's already in the know is starting to see that we don't have to do it for them, to simply remind them that they've already had it done. And it's always been done. It's always part of who they are. So thinking in those terms, my sense is, Jackie, that's the piece. That's the change. And that's really what Gandhi was also talking about. You know, Gandhi was an attorney. So he was a very good logical speaker, but he also saw the collective nature of everyone and the collective ability to actually galvanize people as a unity against, at that time, the British Empire, and completely uprooted them by simply being committed to recognizing that people had much greater sense of knowing collectively than we do when we're fighting individually or fighting anything or anyone. He was also my favorite story. He went to a convention and his normal, you know, wrap, that white thing that he wore, toga, whatever they called it. I think that was a Roman term, and they said you have to wear a suit when he got there. So he said, okay, and he left and he sent them back a suit. But he didn't go to the convention. And I love that kind of thinking. If they wanted a suit, they got it. If they wanted him, they could take him as he came and where he was and how he was. And that today is considered brave and courageous and all that. It certainly was then too, but that's a pretty normal state, is just to say, look, this is what you get right now. And it's because, you know why? How things are is exactly how we get them right now. It's exactly how they are. Parting thoughts?
No, I think for me, that's, conceding the fight and then carrying the message for me forward to everyone, to everything. And also on a side personal note is I have 2 young children, and I sort of see the normal inner human conflict on a daily basis in some manner or another. Fighting against rules, you know, fighting against ego of themselves, even at such a young age. And the ever presence of grandma and adults trying to tell them what to do and how to act, how to behave, is to try and carry this message to them as well at such an impressionable young age, and how to do that. So that's all. I think, like you said, just be my being.
For me, it's I always have everything I need.
And that's the gift of knowing right there. You hear a lot of people say, I'm starving, when they'd eaten about 3 hours ago. Right? Normally, in every moment, everything is just fine. I have a friend, Gabe, who's an Academy Award winning director. And he said, I don't know how I'm a good director. He said, but all I ever do is get to the set and introduce myself to everybody and say to them, how do you see this working? And he sits back and he spends 2 days or whatever the time is and really gets to know the actors and the actresses and the cinematographer, all of them. And he says, as they really get, as there's a cohesiveness, he goes, okay, let's do that. And I suspect with kids, they're just learning that they can say no. So they probably overuse it and don't really engage like we are learning to, even in this conversation. How do we engage in ideas that don't always match up with the ones we're holding and still benefit from it and grow as a result? And normally in communication, or often in communication, that isn't the case. So kids are pretty sensitive, but I would say we are very sensitive adults to what we think they should be doing. And one of the things that tends not to happen is actually ask them, how would you like it to be? How do you see this working? If this is the goal, how do you see this happening? What's the part you could play? And they're so fucking creative. They will give you ideas so quick, so fast, and so complimentary that they'll be happy to be a part of that rather than constantly feel like they're the odd person out.
Do you ever use that scenario with say newcomers to the program or just people on the street or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never used that.
I like that.
Well, it actually begins to recognize that if they're fully intact, they're probably going to do things beyond what we think they will. So if we give them a chance, that's a better chance they will than if we don't think they should or would or could.
Yeah, you told me last session with the group that my mother-in-law, is better than that. And that was really helpful to sort of say to her or to say to myself about her. You're better than that.
Well, then the knowing awareness is that we all are. We're all better than the things we stoop to try to make believe that the lies we tell are true. We all are. And to begin to see that in everybody is to begin to bring the peace you're looking for into the recognition that it already exists. And by making believe it doesn't is the obstruction to it. That's where the collision comes, the seeming collision. But nothing's colliding except in our thought that something's colliding. And then when I start saying, well, there's always a collision when I do that, it's just because I'm relying on thought as my source, rather than saying there can't be a collision in something that doesn't have any parts.
Yeah.
There's no chance. It's like having air collide. And certainly in wind, it can, right? But what does it do? It just sort of incorporates and interacts with itself. It doesn't just collide and end up saying, okay, I'm useless now. It just goes about being air afterwards. It's just moving around at a different pace. Anyway, I love you guys.
Yeah. So how do you sum up that knowing awareness in the you're better than that? Because I guess I'd like to add that to my conclusion.
Well, keep in mind also, this goes back. This is, maybe a thought I was holding till next time, but if the nature of our existence, and this goes for everyone who's listening and everyone who isn't listening and everyone who we think isn't even alive, if the nature of existence is our nature, it's happening right now. And it isn't something that's exclusive to those of us who are talking about it. And your simple and yours, Jackie, as you begin to see peace as your nature, you'll begin to see it everywhere because you will begin to see that all that kept you from thinking it wasn't there was your thinking. And your thinking now is being introduced to who you really are rather than giving it the task of trying to create a who that it can't create in reality. It's starting to express our nature. So to see that, Gabe, is you don't have to say anything to anyone to have that become a present part of your presence, your human presence, and just create space for people to see this probably isn't the best I can be doing. And when they're thinking we're about ready to attack them, they're not going to think that. They're going to think about, how do I protect myself against this new onslaught? Because when I was predisposed to defense, which I can't say I'm not any longer, there's plenty of things that reveal that I have thoughts that are really on edge and that are defensive. Plenty of things happen all day long. Driving's probably my best evidence of it. I don't think very well of other drivers when I drive. It's a perfect chance to see that I've got a lot of thoughts about what should be happening that are not true and real, but they're certainly the thoughts I'm having. And if I just have them, it's kind of like I'm holding that kid a little bit and saying, okay, let's have these thoughts and this is what's happening, rather than try to think it shouldn't be and add another layer of conflict to the already existing conflict. It gives me a chance to become familiar enough and let it go in the sense of having it. You can't let go of what you claim not to have.
Yeah.
There's no way to do it. So the presence alone changes everything. And if you sit back and begin to actually let that be part of your awareness, you'll start seeing that you're not even seeing things the way you used to think they were happening.
No.
Change is very quick. And then you're going to start seeing that pretty much everything you think you're in conflict with isn't really even happening without your thought being in conflict with it. And then pretty soon the irritants are not going to be irritating anymore. And you'll feel that sense of responsibility and ownership and laugh at the fact that you thought it wasn't yours all along.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and it's just experience and practice and
good homework.
Being playful, starting to see that this is something that we can all do. And it's something we're all doing all the time. We just have been dysfunctioning around it to the point where we made believe it was the only truth and reality that was possible. And that's a pretty big lie when all possibility would include all possibility, certainly not just that possibility. Deep breath. All right. I love you guys. I
Love you
really
too.
appreciate this. And I also appreciate the movement of this second conversation. And part of the idea of doing 3 conversations is so that we and the audience can see that there's a progressive potential for this awareness to grow in conversation. And it certainly helps to have people who are interested in the conversation rather than people who are absolutely sure it's absolutely insane to have this conversation. Doesn't mean they can't, but to try to convince them is like, again, trying to start the car with water. It doesn't help. Just use your impetus as a chance to begin to say, oh, here's another little lack I think I have to make believe that they're uninterested and have no hope is my thought about who they are, when in fact that can't be true if they have that all in their essence. And then it becomes laughable that they have such a defense, and you'll start seeing your own defenses in that same way. They're just acts. It's like you've been given a dramatic role, but you're feeling happy when you get to the theater. But you got a job to do. And those thoughts give us the sense we have a job to do on their behalf. Peace.
Peace.
Thanks, Jeff.
Love you guys.
Love
You
you.
too.